briefing video is to brief you on the key details for the esterification reaction. So what you're doing in this particular experiment is you're taking benzoic acid, which has got a carboxylic acid, and then with methanol, heating it under reflux with an acid catalyst to turn that carboxylic acid into an ester. And in terms of the theory of how this esterification works, you'll learn about this more in your sort of organic chemistry component of your sort of theory modules under carbonyl chemistry. In terms of the lab skills that this experiment is here to teach you, firstly, you'll get repeat practice performing these particular techniques, so working safely in the lab, how to heat a reaction under reflux using IR spectroscopy, and also keeping a record of what you did in your experiment in a lab book. The new skills, the key skills that this experiment is introducing to you is how to do a purification using liquid-liquid extraction. Part of that includes how to use a key piece of equipment called a rotary evaporator, which is used to remove solvents. And finally, how to purify your sample using a distillation, a technique which you might have done previously in high school. So we've got videos showing you how to perform these techniques, and in particular do focus on the video covering sort of the liquid-liquid extraction. We can see here what you have is a sort of separating funnel, and then you pour sort of liquids in and then use it to separate compounds. It's a really common technique that you will use at the end of most of the experiments you perform, so this important technique has been introduced in this experiment. In terms of how to structure and plan your time in the lab, this is sort of a rough breakdown on how the experiment should work for you. So the reflux should be for an hour. So in the first sort of 2 hours, you'll have sort of setting up your reaction, setting up your reflux, and let it run for an hour. And then either maybe in the final hour of the morning or just after lunch, you can be sort of starting the liquid-liquid extraction process. Okay, and this process will take a couple of hours for you to do, mostly because, you know, obviously it's a different technique to what you've done before. There's lots of little steps in there, so it's just working at making sure that you follow the order of steps correctly from your lab manual. Then after you've done your liquid-liquid extraction, your purification from the liquid-liquid extraction gives you what we call a crude product. So it will be your product, but maybe hasn't purified or removed all the impurities. Then you're going to do a distillation, which should be at the end of the day, using distillation and then analysis with IR at the end. Okay, like with every experiment that you do in the lab, before you start, do make sure you check the hazards. Okay, some of the questions of the hazards you're going to be using, some of the hazards will be questions in your pre-lab exercise as well. And a good piece of advice is to always just check the hazard just before you're about to use the chemical. So it's okay if you've forgotten what the hazards are of the chemical after you've done your pre-labs. So what you need to make sure then is before you just start to use the chemical, look in your lab manual and check what hazards are to make sure you're using it safely and correctly. In this experiment, I think probably the most hazardous chemical you're going to be using is methanol. So it's highly flammable. You're going to be heating it up using a reflux, and it's you're going to be using fairly large quantities of methanol as well. So you're going to be really careful of making sure there are no sparks nearby that could cause the methanol to ignite. Okay. The other sort of key hazards, probably using diethyl ether in the workup. Again, that's a really highly flammable solvent and something you're going to be using lots of. And also, you're going to be using sulfuric acid, which is a corrosive substance as well. Okay, some key tips for performing this reaction well. Okay, so the first set of tips covers both the reflux and distillation. Okay, so you've got fairly complex setups with the glassware. You've got glassware fitting into joints between flasks and condensers and adapters. So make sure you use the correct sort of joint sizes as well, so there's no gaps between the flasks and the adapters and condensers. If when you are clamping your glassware, make sure you clamp things correctly. So clamp around the flask, clamp around the pieces of glassware that are at the bottom of the apparatus that can hold everything up. So what you don't want is sort of flasks sort of dropping off the bottom and smashing on the bottom of your fume hood. And also with both a reflux and a distillation, you're going to be using a condenser. So do make sure your tubing is tight, you've got the tubing fitted correctly into the tap, so there's no sort of leaks. And again, key piece of advice is to always just check your condenser is working and there's no leaks, perhaps away from any electrical equipment, before you actually start your reflux and your distillation. Okay, with regards to the liquid-liquid extraction, okay, some key pieces of advice is when you are sort of using the separating funnel and you're opening this tap at the bottom to pour away layers of liquid into the conical flasks, okay, make sure you don't have a stopper at the top, otherwise that will be slow down the drainage. Make sure you take the stopper off so air can come in through the top rather than through the bottom of the separating funnel. And then also you're going to be collecting lots of liquids, organic liquids, aqueous liquids into conical flasks, okay, and only some of them will contain your product. Okay, so what you want to do is make sure that you don't throw any of these conical flasks with your liquids away until the end, until you've checked that you've got your product, just in case you end up taking forward the wrong solution to your distillation. Okay, so you don't want to throw something away and then find that you have to start the whole experiment again because you used the wrong conical flask. Okay, so that's the briefing for the esterification video. Make sure you also check read the script, and you also look at the theory video and check the videos of the techniques as well to be fully prepared for the experiment.